Hi, everyone. I'm Ebony Ryan, Senior Marketing Communications Manager here at Cardinal Path. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we kick off part one of our two-part training series, Google Data Studio Lab. We're hoping to empower you to create engaging and efficient marketing dashboards that tell a story and inform smarter business decisions. But before we get started, I just have a couple housekeeping items to review. First, this session is being recorded. A link to the recording will be sent to you via email tomorrow morning. We have allowed time for questions throughout and at the end, so please send them in as you think of them. Just use the questions tab on your go-to panel, and we'll address as many as possible. If we're not able to answer your questions live, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly via email. And with that, I will hand it over to Faisal.
Thanks, Ebony. Welcome, everyone. My name is Faisal. I have been working with Cardinal Path for perhaps the last 5 years. Out of the last 5 years, about 4 of those years, starting in December of 2015 with the search engine optimization team. I came to the company with a history of digital marketing for over 15 years. I've been working on SEO, SEM, email marketing, and even quite a bit of out-of-home advertising. Previous history includes Yellow Pages, billboards, even radio. And so I brought that diversity to the team and really enjoyed working with search engine optimization. And in recent years, I've also been dabbling in analytics and getting the data from a variety of different channels into a format that is easy to view and digest, which essentially is what brings us to the Data Studio webinar today. Also, a little bit about me. You may hear some background noise. I do have a bird, as well as a dog and a cat. So if you hear any rumblings in the background, that's probably them. So apologies for that in advance. At Cardinal Path, we are known first and foremost for our expertise in analytics, and we call ourselves a analytics consultancy. Effectively what that means is we help our clients gather and understand their data, and our clients range from medium enterprises to multinational organizations. We have over 200 analysts, statisticians, data scientists collectively, and digital marketers who are the subject matter experts in one particular channel or another. And with the recent acquisition of Enor, we are once again the largest Google Analytics reseller, and that often drives people to us for the first time. Companies that are looking for analytics experts do a search, figure out who's in that space, and they come to us either for help with their own implementation or to ask us for training to help them implement analytics themselves. So with that background about myself and about Cardinal Path, let's get into why we're here today. For those of you who are not familiar with Data Studio already, we're going to dive in a little bit into the benefits of using Data Studio, why we would choose this particular tool. We're also going to cover some of the basic elements of a report. There isn't a lot of prerequisites for attending today's session. This is an introductory session into Data Studio. If you have extensive experience, stick around for our second session, which will be next week, where we talk about advanced functions and features. And if you don't have a lot of experience, you're in the right place. We're going to connect to data sources. We'll be using a free data source from Google. And then towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about audiences and reporting considerations that you might have. So as I mentioned, we're going to be connecting to a free data source. This is so that everyone who is attending today, who will receive the recording, can actually follow along themselves. There is a demo account for Google Analytics. This account is connected to Google's merchandise store, where you can go and purchase apparel, office accessories, stationery with Google's logo or brands that they own, such as YouTube and Android. And those are real transactions and real sessions happening on their site. that you can then connect to with your own Google account and pull that data into a report. You, of course, won't necessarily be able to do much with it other than take a look, but it's very useful if you have not had experience with Google Analytics, or if you need a data source to connect to that is accessible, then you can certainly follow the link in this slide and you can connect to that yourself. So let's talk a little bit about why we would want to use Data Studio. So first and foremost, like all the Google productivity suite, Data Studio is easy to create, it's easy to share, and already has some built-in integration with some of the other Google tools that are available. So we have Google Analytics, which we've already talked about. We have Google Ads. For those of you who are in the organic space, we have Google Webmaster Tools, or as it's now known as Search Console, as well as the Google Analytics 360, or the premium side, where we have Campaign 360, Search Ads 360, as well as several other platforms that you might want to connect your data to. Secondly, Data Studio is open. We have APIs that you can type into and use to create additional functionality, your own custom visualizations, your own connectors to data sources that are not owned and created by Google. And like the rest of the Office productivity suite, it is fairly user-friendly and has a familiar interface if you've used any of the other Google Docs or Google Sheets software. Data Studio itself is primarily a data visualization tool. I would not call it necessarily for a data analysis or business analysis, but what it can do, and it does fairly well, is to pull the data in and then be able to present it in a form that would help you uncover some insights. We all face a lot of data coming in on a daily basis, and with the amount of data that's coming in, it can be difficult to run through Excel sheets and Google Sheets to find the aggregate information you want to get. So data visualization's goal is to help you put that data into context and then help you identify areas where there might be issues, or areas where you might not realize you have certain wins or certain opportunities available to you. So we talked about some of the data sources that you could use. You're not restricted to creating a connector or using the standard connectors that Google provides, although there are numerous connectors available already. If you simply have a data source in the form of a spreadsheet, you can definitely push that into the Data Studio dashboard, either as a spreadsheet itself or a comma separated or tab separated file. And of course, if you're inclined to do so, you can create your own connectors. If you're not part of the Google ecosystem, or if you're specifically looking for a connector to third-party sources, such as Bing platform, which is Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, or any of the others, chances are there's already a connector available, and either for free or for a nominal fee, many of these connectors are available for you to use. So we've covered a few of the reasons why you might want to use Data Studio. If you're not familiar with the tool, let's cover some of the elements of the reports themselves. So typical reports are comprised of three distinct parts. You have individual charts, which contain a graph or a table that you want to put your data into to help visualize that. You have a page for your charts, where you might collectively include some charts that are talking about the same particular channel, or are helping to tell a story about that particular channel. Or you might even divide it by a particular user type. And lastly, you have reports, which pull together different pages that you've created. And these reports might, just like the pages do, collectively tell a story that you wouldn't be able to fit or wouldn't necessarily flow on a single page. So rather than going through several slides of how Data Studio works, or how you would connect to particular data sources or create charts, what we plan to do for today is go through a live demonstration of the tool. So we'll show you an example of a report that we would like to create, and then we'll break it down step by step as to how you could create something like that for yourself. So bear with me here for just a second. Okay, so in just a moment here, we should have a example of a page opening up, which includes some data from the Google Merchandise Store. So as you can see on this page, we have several different elements. We have a logo in the top left. We have what appear to be a couple of visualizations. One is a line graph, or as Google calls it, a time series chart. We have a table, which includes some data. And then we have a few drop-down filters at the very top that allow you to dive into your data. So this is essentially what we would like to create today. But before we do that, let's get into the interface and how you would navigate to a page like that to create a new report. When you go to the Data Studio website, which is datastudio.google.com, you'll be asked to log in with your existing Google account. If you don't have a Google account already, you will need to create one. It does not have to be a Gmail account. It just needs to be an email address that has a Google account attached to it. Then when you log in, you'll be presented with a couple of options in the menus. On the left-hand side, you'll be given a breakdown of the types of reports available, either ones you've worked on recently, reports that have been shared with you, reports that you've created yourself, and reports that you've thrown away. And in the top half of the screen, you have several templates available to you. These are being taken from the template gallery available for Data Studio, as well as the option to create a blank report. And then below that, you'll have a list of the reports for the section that you're in. We're currently in the section for reports that I've created myself. So what you would like to do is, in all likelihood, as if you're starting out from the beginning, is to create a blank report. We've already taken a couple of steps to create one for you, so we don't go through the menu itself, and already laid out a general idea of how we would like to organize our report. So from here, we're going to take it to the original example that we showed you. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of charts, a logo, and some filters on the report. So let's begin by navigating around the screen and seeing how we can add those to our page. At the very top of your report, you have a menu. And this is just like every other menu for Google Office Productivity Suite or productivity software. All the functions and all the features that you want to use are going to be included here. So you have File, Edit, which does things like copy and paste or undo selections. You can view several different or change the view of your report. You can insert elements on the page or a page itself, and so forth. And then below that, you have some frequently used options. And here we find the option to add a page, undo or redo an action, use the selector or your pointer tool, add several different types of charts and filters, or some non-interactive features like images, lines, text boxes. And you also have the option to change your theme and layout. Okay, so we already have an idea of what our report is going to look like. Let's go ahead and add some of those elements to the report. So here we're going to go to where I've put a placeholder for a logo. And instead, what we're going to do here is add an image. So if you navigate to the Insert menu at the top, you'll see that there is a list of the potential visualizations you could add, as well as some of the non-interactive elements such as images. We're going to click on that. And then immediately after you do that, you'll be presented with a crosshair and simply click and drag to the size of the image that you want to import. And now you don't see anything on the screen where the image should be laid, but on the right-hand side, you have some properties for the image that you're going to create. So here, what you want to do is either provide the file for the image that you want to load, or we're going to provide a link to the file if it exists somewhere on the internet. So here, we're going to upload a file from our desktop, and I already have one downloaded for the Google Merchandise Store. So we're going to click on that, And automatically that box that we had created is going to be resized to fit the image according to the largest dimension possible. So this is a fairly wide image, but not very tall. So it shrunk it down height-wise a little bit. If it's not in the exact position you want to put it, you can definitely drag it and put it into the place where it needs to be. And here we're going to move it a little bit to the left and a little bit down, and that looks about right. Okay, so next we're going to add a couple of charts. The first chart that we encountered was a time series chart or a line chart. And we can do that one of two ways. We can go back to the insert menu, or we can go to add a chart. This time, I think I'll just click on the add a chart since it takes one less click. And then we'll click on time series. Once again, we're presented with the crosshairs for the chart itself, and we can click and drag it to be the size that we want it to take on the screen itself. Now, once you start adding visualizations to the report, Google Data Studio will try to connect it to a data source that is either already connected, or if you have one already in your account, you may potentially see that. Occasionally, if you're starting a brand new report, you may see no data sources at all, or you may not see any data. It might show up as an error, and you might have some other configurations to do. So we'll get into that in just a moment, but what we want to do before we move on is add our second chart. So we'll go ahead and delete the placeholder for that. We'll go back up to the top. This time we'll go back to the insert menu. I'm going to select a table. And once again, I'm going to drag and drop to the space I want it to take up. Okay. So I see here that we have two charts already. Now, occasionally you might find that the data source connected is not exactly what you want. So what we're going to do is go back up to the menu and go to resource. And here we can control the data sources that we're connected to, and we can control exactly what data is filtered through and shown on the page. I'm going to go to manage added data sources. And we're going to start fresh by removing any existing data source there. Confirmation, yes, we're going to remove. And we're going to add a data source. Here we are presented with first the native connectors that Google provides. Currently there are 17 of these connectors. And below that, if you keep scrolling, there are some connectors that have been built by other people, other companies and agencies that you might want to connect to as well. But at the very top, we have Google Analytics, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to connect to. We click on that. And then since I've already connected to the demo account for the Google Merchandise Store, I'm going to connect to the demo account. The property will be the Google Merchandise Store. And the view that I want to use is the master view. If this is not familiar to you, I strongly recommend checking out the Google Analytics 101 webinars. And that goes into more detail about how a Google account is structured, or how a Google Analytics account is structured. So once I click add, Google is going to tell me some information about my actions. So it's just going to give me a warning that this is going to be added to the report. Any dimensions and metrics that are included on the report but aren't compatible, they might not work. And it's just giving you a warning about what the potential implications are. Not to worry, we're going to have some options to make some changes here as well. So when I connected, I indicated the account, property, and view. And what I want to do here is, if I'm going to be connecting to multiple data sources in the future, I want to make sure that I give a descriptive name to this particular data source. So here we're going to click on Edit, and that'll open up an options menu where we have the name of the resource. Currently, it's called One Master View. I think this definitely needs a change. Perhaps we'll call it Google Merchandise Store. I also tend to include what the data source is. So I use GA for Google Analytics, and perhaps even the date when it was added. So today is June the 2nd, so we'll add it for June the 2nd. And then below that, we have all the fields that Google Analytics will show to us. So these come from the Google Analytics API. All the default fields are there, and any custom fields that you may have created, such as dimensions and metrics in Google Analytics, those will be there as well, all of the custom variables. We're not necessarily concerned about the custom variables right now. We can definitely tinker with that later. Okay, now we can click Done. So here we have the name of the resource reconfigured. It's telling us that there are 0 charts connecting and tells us that this data source is working. We're all set. Let's close this option. Okay, so the charts that we added earlier, now they're no longer connected. So here what we want to do is select the charts on the page. And then once we do that, on the right-hand side, you get 2 different tabs. You get a data tab and you get a style tab. The data tab simply allows you to change the data sources and choose the metrics and dimensions that are being pulled in, and gives you the option to either use comparisons, such as previous period or previous year, or apply filters that you want to apply. So under the data tab, the very first option is data source. We're going to connect it to the Google Merchandise Store data source that we just connected to. And that appears under the added data sources. So I've named it Google Merchandise Store, and we can easily click that. Next, Data Studio pulls in the date dimension. That's perfect for our use case because we are looking at trended data, but we actually are not interested in the number of new users as the metric. So what you would like to do is, if you want to change the dimension or the metric, simply click on the name of the dimension or the metric that you want to change, and that'll open up a drop-down menu for you. If I recall correctly, the example report used the field of sessions. So we'll type that into the search bar, and then it'll filter all the metrics that we could use just to the ones that have the word session included. All right, so in a moment, that's added. Okay, so maybe we should add a couple of more metrics here that might give our audience or the users a little bit more context about how well the website's doing. So another popular metric that people often request is the bounce rate. And this simply indicates how often users leave without visiting a second page on the site. So that's been added, although it appears that it doesn't seem to change very much, but we'll get into the reasons why in just a moment. And then we want to actually create another metric that is not available natively right now, but you can definitely combine a couple of metrics to create it. So if I wanted to know the percentage of new users that arrive at my website, we don't have a percentage available natively, but I can use the new users metric and the total users metric to create that for myself. So just as we did for adding a single metric like sessions or bounce rate, we can click on the metric field and then go down to create a field and create our own formula for it. Here, again, I recommend creating a descriptive name for your metric. So we're going to use % new users. And then under the formula section, we're going to use the 2 metrics that I just mentioned. It's going to be new users divided by just users. So this is a fraction or a % of the total users that are new. Now we want to change the type of value it is. Originally, this is called a number, but we're going to click on that and we're going to change that to a numeric value that is a %, because this just goes from 0 to 100% or 0 to 1. We hit apply. And in just a moment here, that metric will be added to our chart. So you'll see, just like the bounce rate, that % new users seems to hug the bottom, the horizontal axis for us. Why don't we go ahead and fix that right now? So we've explored the data tab a little bit. Let's head over to the style tab. And the style tab allows us to change the look and feel of the report itself, or the particular chart that we're on. Now, under the style tab, the metric names or the dimension names won't be available. They're simply called the series, such as series 1, 2, and 3. And in this case, they correspond to the legend that you see for the chart. So series 1 is sessions, series 2 is bounce rate, and series 3 is new users. Here we can change things such as the color of the line itself, the weight of the line, which will increase to 4. And you can also change which axis this particular line chart uses. So here they're all configured to the left-hand side, but we notice that sessions goes up to the thousands and bounce rate and new users, percent new users does not go up that high. So we'll definitely want to correct that by moving the bounce rate and percent new users to the right axis. So if you scroll down under the Style tab, find Series 2 and Series 3, look for axis left and right, and simply click on right. And what that will do is, in a couple of moments, it'll shift those particular metrics to the right-hand side, and then we've created a new axis on the right-hand side for that. And you see it goes from 40% to 100%. We'll fix that in a moment. I strongly believe you should have it starting at 0 so that we don't confuse anyone as to where this metric can start and end. Okay. Just like we increase the thickness of the first series, we'll also want to do that just to keep it a little bit consistent. Okay. And let's make sure that we have headings or we have titles for our axes as well. Now that we have 2 axes, we want to make sure that there's no confusion about what is being referred to when we have the sessions going from 1.5 to 3,000 or the bounce rates going from 40 to 100. So keep scrolling down in the style menu, and we have the axes styles. So we want to definitely make sure that we're showing the axes. We keep scrolling down. We definitely want to show the left axis title. We click on that. The minimum we're going to set to 0. The maximum we'll leave at auto. And for the right axis, we'll do the same. We'll show the axis title. We'll set the minimum to 0, and we'll leave the maximum at auto. And so here now, you can definitely see that we have a title for the left and right-hand axis. Now, what you may want to do is in your own reports, you may want to adjust the size of the axis to make it more legible, depending on whether or not these are going to be printed out or you're going to be sharing them digitally. A decent size, in my opinion, would be maybe 14 point or 14 pixels or higher. And if you find yourself running out of space within the visualization, anytime you see some dotted lines within a chart or visualization, that can be adjusted within the space that you have. And so we can push that a little bit inwards so that we have more room for the title of our axes. And there you have it. So we have a time series chart that looks pretty close to what we had in our example. Further adjustments can be made, of course, if you want to change the size or the placement of it. So next, what we want to do is we want to recreate the table we had at the bottom. And the table we had at the bottom included some product information. So let's quickly reference that to see what it had. So we had a product, we have the names, we have product revenue, the quantity added to cart, quantity checked out, and the quantity refunded. These are all e-commerce metrics that are in Google Analytics, and they're being pulled in for the Google Merchandise Store. So let's go ahead and add those to this particular page. So just as we had to do for the line chart, once we click on the table or what is going to become the table, we have to define the source. So let's click on data source under the data tab. Click on Google Merchandise Store. And automatically, Data Studio is going to include some metrics and dimensions. Now, you may not necessarily want to use these, but of course, we can change them to our liking. So in our case, we want to use the product dimension. And when you add product dimensions and metrics to a chart, occasionally you may find that it appears to break inside of Data Studio. And that actually has to do with what's called the scope of a field or a scope of a metric. And without getting too deep into Google Analytics, different metrics have different scopes available to them. Some are tied to users, some are tied to sessions, and some are tied to events and not necessarily tied to users or sessions. Suffice it to say, if you have e-commerce metrics, you're going to want to stick to e-commerce metrics typically to be able to see the data. So we noticed that the new users metric didn't work. It just showed us no data. What we actually want to do is add a metric that works with the products. So we're going to add in here product revenue. So we search for product revenue under metrics, and that can be added. And suddenly we have some data. Next, we can keep adding the other metrics that we saw, which included, oh, we'll just click on that, there we go, which included quantity added to cart. There we go. We had quantity checked out. And let's take a quick look here. Product revenue, quantity added to cart, quantity checked out, and the quantity refunded. So once again, click on metric. There we go. Just taking a couple of moments here to respond. Quantity refunded. There we go. So that'll take a moment to pull in those metrics from our Google Analytics account. Now, we're not quite done yet here, because when the chart was originally created, or I should say when this table was originally created, we had the new users metric in the chart, and we are not actually using that. And so when we look at the table, it's hard to tell how it's being sorted. So we're going to scroll down a little bit within the data tab and go to the sort section. And instead of new users, we're going to choose product revenue. And what this will do is it allows us to see which products have the most revenue from top to bottom. And then it's really easy to say, oh, okay, this particular product's doing well. If you wish, you can also define a secondary sort. In my experience, that's typically not as helpful as the primary sort, because generally the first sort, if it's a metric, has some unique value that doesn't match with most other products. Okay, so I think we're pretty close to being done here on the data tab. Next, what we'll want to do is we'll want to change the style a little bit. So we noticed in our example, we had some darker headings for our table. So if you head over to the style section, just like we did with the line chart, we can change some colors and the sizes for the fonts and some other features about it. So at the very top, we have table headers. And here we can change the color of the font. Right now it's, I believe, a light gray. We'll change that to white. And in the table colors, the header background color can be changed to that dark gray that we had going in the example. I would like to have larger font sizes so it's easier to read on a screen. And so we're going to change the table header font size, make it something like, let's say, a 16. And the labels for the individual rows of data, we'll up that to, let's say, 14. Now, it's still not easy to read, probably because we haven't resized the columns yet, but we'll certainly get to that after we've resized everything else. And finally, what I would like to do is go back to the data tab and add a summary row. And the summary row simply gives you the aggregate data for each of the columns where it's relevant. So you'll get the total revenue for product revenue, total quantity added to cart and removed, etc. Okay, we can also style the summary row by looking for that option in the style tab. And the summary row, one second here. Cart header, summary row. Just a second here. It looks like my system is taking a little bit of time to respond here. Okay, there we go. So it's under table footer. And so for the table footer, you can do a couple of different things. You can change the border color if you want to divide the table footer from the rest of your data. We're going to choose the same color as the header background, and then we're going to give that a slight thickness, let's say thickness of 2. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now that we're done with the data and the size of the fonts and colors, we're going to go back to our table and just resize the columns a little bit. Since we only have about 300 rows of data, we don't need that much room for the number column, so we'll squeeze that down. And then typically working from left to right, or at least that's easiest for me, I resize the dotted lines which indicate the column endpoints, the start and stop, to something that's reasonable for the data that we have. So we only have about 4 metrics and 1 dimension, and so we don't actually need that much space. But since we've allotted the full width of the page for this particular table, we're going to take advantage of that by spacing things out. Okay. All right. So Data Studio is taking a little bit of time to respond to those those change requests. Do we have any questions, Ebony, from the team or from the audience?
Yeah, so we have a couple questions here. One is, how many charts and pages can I include in a report?
Excellent. So I don't believe there is a limitation to the number of charts you can include on a particular page or in a report itself. However, what you will find is that if your report gets very large and you have multiple different charts, dozens of data sources and filters, you'll find that there is a reduction in the there's an increase in loading time or a reduction in the speed, I guess, of how your report loads. So every single time you have a chart on the screen, it increases the number of data requests that Data Studio sends out, and there is some processing time involved with that. But once the data is there, it's fairly snappy, and to combat that, Data Studio does cache some of the data so that it's not constantly making requests. Thank you. All right, so we have our table resized, and now we're ready to tackle some of the other features we had towards the top of the report. So for the heading, what we're going to do is give it a descriptive heading for the page. And actually, I'm going to move it up a little bit and to the left. And as I do that, you'll start noticing that there are some snap features available so that Data Studio helps you with lining up the visualizations you have, the charts and tables that you have. So I'm going to snap that to the grid there. And then since this is already a text box, I could type right in here, but I want to show you how you would add the text box if you haven't done it before. So we'll delete this, and then we'll create a new text box by going up to the menu. And here we have the frequently used visualizations and elements. And there is an element here that has a box with an A inside, the letter A. That is for a text box. So we'll click on that. We'll be presented with the crosshairs, and we can simply drag and choose the size of the text box we want to use. And here we'll type in something like website engagement and e-commerce metrics or e-commerce data. All right, so we have our text in there. Now it's not formatted so that it's easy to read. So we're going to highlight the text within the box, and then we're going to choose the color and the size just as we have for the other visualizations. So here I'm going to pick a bold font and increase the size of the text to, let's say, 24. If your text flows beyond the size of the box, you can of course resize it to accommodate that. Great. So we'll push our items up a little bit. And now we can get started on filters. And filters are really neat. So filters allow you as the user of a report who perhaps doesn't have edit access and hasn't really made any decisions about what metrics are coming in to slice and dice your data according to how you need it. So perhaps you might want to change the date range, which we haven't talked about yet. But by default, the date range that is provided for the graphs and the charts that you create is the past 28 days. If you're not interested in the past 28 days, but you want to fix that to, let's say, the previous month or previous quarter, you can definitely enable a filter on the page to do that. So let's start off with adding a date filter to, or date control to the page itself. So going back to the main menu, if we go to Insert, we'll see that there are filters available towards the bottom of the menu itself, and date range is one of the filters available. Just like all the other elements, you're presented with a crosshair, and this time also even a suggested size for the filter itself. And if you click on the page, you'll be inserting a date filter or date range filter on the page. We're going to move that to the top right up against this horizontal line that we've added. And then for the properties for that date range filter, on the data side, we have auto date range selected by default. We can change that to something else. So in many cases, reports are given on a monthly basis, and you're reviewing the previous month's data. So under the options for the date range, you can find that there are several, such as last 7 days, last quarter, last year, or even the current quarter or year. We're going to go ahead and choose last month and then hit apply. Okay. And then we're going to move over to the Style tab. And as we do, we're noticing that already Data Studio is reconfiguring those charts to have data going from the beginning of the previous month to the end of the previous month. Okay. I want to make my date picker or my filter look perhaps a little bit nicer. So what we're going to do is we're going to change a few things about it. We're going to change the color of the text and the color of the background. So we're kind of going with a theme here of dark headers. So we'll pick a white text or a white font for the filter itself. I'm okay with 14 pixels, but if we want to make the filters a little bit smaller, you can certainly adjust that to maybe a 12. And at this point, it'll be difficult to see, but your filter is still there. Next, we change the background color for the filter, the same dark gray that is one of the presets. And so this changes how it looks when you're not selecting the filter. And if you want to change the drop-down colors, then you also have that under the header section. So the header font color, we're going to go with the white again. And for the background of the header, we're going to go with the dark gray. And to show you what I mean by that, if we quickly pop over to the View tab or the View mode of this report, we'll see that not only do we have a dark background for the filter as well as the white text. When you click on the dropdown, it also provides you with the same dark backdrop with the white text for the button for apply and for the date range dropdown. Okay, I think we're almost there. So we had a couple more filters to add to our report, and those include the device category. So occasionally you want to split your data up by device type. And so we're going to add a filter for that. So date range had its own special filter. For all the other filters for your data, you have to choose either your filter control option or your data control option. Filter control is for the metrics and dimensions that you get from, for example, Google Analytics. And data control is neat in that it allows you to connect to multiple different data sources and choose which one you want to include in your report. We're going to choose filter control. And just as we did with the date filter, we're going to add that right next to the date range filter we already had. Now, filter control, when I put it on the page, automatically went to date. We don't want that. So under the data tab, we're going to click on date. And as soon as it responds, we're going to choose device category. And we're going to do that by typing in device, CAT, and it should automatically filter for us the device category dimension. There we go. Click on device category. Now, we're filtering here for a device category, and what that simply means is it a desktop device, a mobile device, or a tablet device? But you might be noticing here, you're also given a metric, and that metric is simply a summary piece of data that is included in the dropdown to let you know before you select that option, what the values for the sessions were for that particular option. Sessions is perfectly fine in this particular use case. So you'll be able to see in the dropdown itself at a quick glance before you select anything, how many sessions were for desktop devices versus mobile versus tablet. Now, before we're done, we also want to change the style of this particular filter. So we're going to go to the Style tab. And just as we applied the styling for our date range filter, we're going to do the same thing for our dimension filter. So again, we're going to go with the light text, and we're going to go with the darker background. Okay. All right, so that's done. If there is a little bit of a gap, you could leave it if you like. If you're a little bit OCD, you can definitely move your filter just a little bit to the left or to the right to push that right against it. Okay, so we already have some styles applied. Now, here's the neat thing about Data Studio. You can actually reproduce charts and filters by copying them and pasting them on the page. So you don't have to go through that process every single time. Now that I've created the device category filter, I can simply click it once more. Use a keyboard shortcut like Control-C or Command-C on your Mac, or you can go to the Edit menu in the top of the report and click Copy, and then you can paste the same filter. And we don't necessarily want to have the same filter over and over again, but this is definitely going to save us a little bit of time styling our filters or styling your charts. And all you simply need to do is change the dimension that you choose from device category to anything else that you like. Here, we're going to use medium, and medium simply means, was it an email? Was it from Google search, or not in Google in particular, but from search? Was it from a paid source, etc. So voila, we have a second filter, or I should say a third filter, created pretty quickly. And you can do the same thing again, just copy that filter that you have, already has the styles applied, drag it to where you need it to go. And if you want to filter by another dimension, you can choose that as well. So let's copy and paste that, move it over right next to medium. Taking just a moment to respond here. Okay, we'll wait for that to come up. Let me take a look here and see what else we need to do on this report. So just quickly looking at what we had in mind, we had the logo, we had the two charts, we had the header, and we had the filters. So no, once we get this filter fixed from going to medium to, let's say, perhaps source, which we can do by clicking on dimension and searching for source, that should be it. So taking a quick peek at the original that we had, wow, that looks like we pretty much did it. So we have the logo for the Google Merchandise Store, we have the two charts, we have a header for the page, we have 4 filters, and looking at the one we just created, that looks pretty much the same. And so now what you would probably want to do is, you spent all this time creating a report, you definitely want to share it. And the keen-eyed among you might have noticed that there is a share button quite prominent next to the view button at the top right. And as I mentioned, just like you could with any of the other Google productivity tools, you can invite people to collaborate, or you can give them a link to view the report. So click on the share button and click on invite people. And just like you would with, let's say, a Google Doc or with a spreadsheet, you can simply add people to view or to collaborate on the report with you. All right, so that's essentially the fundamentals of creating a report in Data Studio. So there are a couple of things to consider when you're trying to generate your reports. things that you should have in preparation ahead of time. And among those is before you start creating reports, have a measurement plan in mind, something that you're working towards. And the measurement plan generally consists of the primary business objectives that you have, not necessarily just for the company overall, but maybe just for the individual website that you're trying to build a report for. And take into consideration the particular metrics that your audiences are going to be interested in. Depending on who that is, that might be metrics that are simply for the top of the funnel, such as sessions and impressions, or the overall cost per click for your campaigns. Or depending on your audience, they might be more interested in are users engaging with the website or the web pages in particular that are part of the campaign? Are people conducting purchases on the site? Are they signing up for accounts or newsletters? Or are they coming back and sharing that content with their friends and family? When you create a report, or if you're creating an individual page for different groups, you'll want to generally separate the metrics and separate the report by what's useful for those audiences. And if you don't have experience in creating a measurement plan, Cardinal Path can definitely help with that as well. We have a team of analysts and strategists who can help you take your business objectives and translate them into particular KPIs, considering what channels you're using, what your goals are, and what's reasonable for your organization to achieve. Of course, there are definitely benchmarks and metrics available from various different sources. So we'll definitely help you understand what you can do with those as well. Lastly, when you're creating these reports, make sure that you already have that plan in place and you're clear about what you're trying to communicate to the audience. And so don't try to add too many things to a particular report. Use the metrics sparingly and make sure they have a purpose on the page. And to the extent needed, add some filters to the report, but don't go overboard with adding 15 different filters. You're just going to lead your audience members to analysis paralysis, or they'll miss things that could have been found if the report was pre-configured to give them that insight. And last comment about benchmarks, there are several industry benchmarks available for metrics such as bounce rates, such as click-through rates. Please be wary of using them. It's great to have benchmarks for your own website based on historical data, but if you're going to include the benchmarks from the industry, just keep in mind that every site is built a little bit differently, and even analytics implementations can have a significant impact on how those metrics are measuring success. So an alternative for you guys is simply to establish internal benchmarks and improve against that, rather than using benchmarks from sources that are not taking into consideration the nuances for your particular website. Okay, so I think that leads us to a Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Faisal. That was really, really helpful. And we do have a handful of questions here. One of the questions is, are we able to combine data from multiple data sources in one chart?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that would work is you would need to create a blended data source. And in fact, that is going to be part of the subject, I believe, for our next session, where we'll talk about how you can connect two data sources together.
Awesome. Okay, so another question here is, does Data Studio store personally identifiable information, or PII?
That's a great question. So for those of you who are not familiar with Google Analytics, you are not allowed to store personally identifiable information in Google Analytics. And that would be things like specific IP addresses or credit card information, email addresses. You have to follow local laws and regulations about that, get consent, and generally speaking, handle it off in some other tool. Data Studio has in its terms of service the expectation that anyone using the tool has already obtained the proper consent for that type of data. And no, the Data Studio itself doesn't necessarily store any data other than what's cached in the moment or that you upload yourself. So if you're feeding personally identifiable information into it, I mean, it could technically be there, but they expect you as a user, as the practitioner or the analyst, to make sure it's scrubbed clean and then you have the proper consents.
Awesome. Well, I think that's really all the time we're going to have here for questions. Like I mentioned earlier, if we did not get to your question, we will reach out to you directly via email with an answer to your question. This is part one of our two-part series on Google Data Studio. So join us next Tuesday for the second part. And following that second part, we will kick off our Google Ads training, Google Ads Fundamentals. Want to thank everyone again for joining us, and we'll see you at one of our next events.